Hey, history nerds, welcome back to WTF History, where we unearth the wildest, darkest, and most jaw-dropping stories from the past that'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Younger is about to face an execution so horrific, it makes Game of Thrones look like a kid's cartoon. We're talking 4 hours of public torture, a cheering crowd of thousands, and a queen sipping wine while watching her enemy get disemboweled. But this wasn't some random nobody. Hugh was the king's favorite, a man who held an entire kingdom in his grip until he made the fatal mistake of crossing the wrong people. How did a minor knight climb to the top of medieval England's power ladder, only to become the star of the most gruesome spectacle in history? Grab a snack, get comfy, because this story is a wild ride, and we're starting from the very beginning. It's 1316, and England's under the rule of King Edward II, a guy who, let's be real, wasn't exactly cut out for the crown. Edward's more into digging ditches and hanging out with farmers than running a kingdom. This is a time when power is everything. Land, titles, and who gets to whisper in the king's ear decide. Whether you're living large in a castle or rotting in a dungeon. Enter Hugh Despenser the Younger, a minor knight with no fancy lineage or battlefield heroics, just a razor-sharp mind and a knack for saying exactly what people want to hear. This guy didn't wield a sword to get ahead. His weapon was his brain, and he used it like a master chess player in a world where losing meant death. So, how does a nobody like Hugh get the keys to the kingdom? It all starts with a job that sounds dull, but was anything but royal chamberlain. In 1316, Hugh lands this gig, and let me tell you, this wasn't just some medieval secretary shuffling papers. The chamberlain was the gatekeeper to the king. Imagine if one person controlled every email, text, and phone call to the president. Today, that's the kind of power we're talking about. Every noble, bishop, or ambassador who wanted Edward's attention had to go through Hugh. Need a favor? Hugh decides if your letter even makes it to the king's desk. Want a meeting? Hugh's the bouncer, and if he doesn't like you, you're stuck waiting, sometimes for months. This guy turned access to the king into a weapon, and he wasn't afraid to swing it. Edward II wasn't your typical king. Chroniclers from the time, think of them as medieval gossip columnists. Describe him as more interested in thatching roofs with peasants than dealing with royal duties. He'd rather be out in the fields getting his hands dirty than sitting on a throne making tough calls. This made him the perfect mark for someone like Hugh, who saw an opportunity and pounced. Edward needed someone to lean on, someone to handle the messy parts of ruling, and Hugh slid into that role like he was born for it. Within weeks of becoming chamberlain, he wasn't just organizing the king's schedule. He was reorganizing the entire royal household to make himself the center of everything. Picture a typical day in Edward's court after Hugh takes over. It's before dawn, and Hugh's already in the king's chambers, sorting through a pile of letters from nobles, bishops, and foreign ambassadors. A plea from the Earl of Lancaster about unfair taxes? Straight into the fire. A bishop whining about church corruption? Hugh tucks that one away, promising to handle it himself. By noon, there's a line of nobles outside the king's door. Some who traveled weeks and spent fortunes to get there. But Hugh controls the guest list, and if he doesn't like your vibe, you're not getting in. One big-shot baron, Lord Berkeley, waited 6 months for a 5-minute chat with Edward because Hugh didn't like the way Berkeley looked at him once. 6 months. Medieval records back this up. Hugh had a memory like a steel trap for anyone who crossed him, and he made them pay. By 1320, Hugh's grip on power was iron tight. He kicked out anyone on the king's council who dared question him, turning it into his personal echo chamber. The Vita Edwardi Secundi chronicles were floored by how much control this guy had. He wasn't just advising the king. He was running the show. And the money? Oh, the money. Hugh and his dad, Hugh the Elder, were siphoning off royal revenue like it was their personal piggy bank. Pound 8,000 a year, enough to buy castles or fund a small army. That's not chump change in the 14th century. Take one merchant, William Deepole, who wanted a wool export license. Should have cost 20 marks. Hugh demanded 500 marks plus 10% of all future profits. When William tried to complain to Edward, Hugh intercepted the message and threw him in prison for disturbing the royal peace. William's family paid 1,000 marks to get him out. That's medieval extortion at its finest. Here's the kicker. Edward knew what Hugh was doing and didn't care. One account says Edward called him "my dear and faithful Hugh." Even his nobles were literally crying over his cruelty. Edward wasn't just turning a blind eye, he was cheering it on. Why? Because Hugh made his life easy. Edward didn't have to deal with saying no to powerful lords or balancing the budget. Hugh handled all that. And if a few people got screwed over, that was just the cost of doing business. To get why Hugh could pull this off, you need to understand medieval courts. The chamberlain wasn't supposed to be this powerful. It was a glorified assistant job, meant for schedules and logistics. But Edward's personality made him ripe for manipulation. He craved emotional support, someone to tell him he was doing great even when the kingdom was falling apart. Hugh figured this out early and made himself indispensable. He wasn't the first to play this game. Edward had a previous favorite, Piers Gaveston, who got murdered by angry barons in 1312 for similar reasons. But where Piers was loud and flashy, Hugh was cold, calculated, and systematic. He didn't want power for a season. He wanted it for life. This setup created a perfect storm. The nobles, who were supposed to keep guys like Hugh in check, were stuck in a catch-22. Opposing Hugh meant opposing the king, which was treason. Supporting him meant a system that was tearing apart the kingdom's traditions. Most just waited, hoping something would change. But Hugh wasn't content with controlling the king's court. He had bigger plans, and they involved taking on someone even more dangerous than the nobles, Queen Isabella herself. You might think a queen would be untouchable, but Hugh didn't care. He saw Isabella as a threat, someone who could challenge his hold over Edward. So, he decided to destroy her, not by killing her, but by stripping away everything that made her a queen. Her lands, her servants, her children, her dignity. Hugh went after it all with surgical precision. This wasn't just politics, it was personal warfare, and it was about to set the stage for one of the most spectacular revenges in history. Let's fast forward to 1324. Isabella's been Queen of England for 16 years, a pro at navigating court politics, brokering alliances between England and her native France, and raising 4 kids, including the future king. She's got her own power base, land, wealth, connections that doesn't rely on Edward or Hugh. That makes her dangerous in Hugh's eyes. He doesn't just want to outmaneuver her. He wants to crush her to make sure she can't threaten his control. What follows is a campaign so ruthless. It's like something out of a psychological thriller, except this was real, and the stakes were life and death. Hugh starts with Isabella's wealth. In September 1324, he pulls off a move that's both bold and brutal. He seizes 28 of her estates in a single day. These aren't just patches of dirt. They're worth 20,000 pounds a year, more than most duchies in Europe. That's serious money, the kind that gives a queen political clout and independence. His excuse? England's at odds with France, and Isabella, being French, might be a security risk. It's flimsy, but Hugh doesn't care about truth. He cares about power. Picture this. At dawn, royal clerks show up at every one of Isabella's properties, reading identical orders declaring her lands forfeit for the safety of the realm. No debate, no appeal, just a gut punch that leaves Isabella financially crippled. Her own records capture her reaction. I am treated worse than a merchant's wife, for even they keep their dowries. That's not just a financial hit. It's a public humiliation, signaling to everyone that the queen's been knocked down. But Hugh's not done. Taking her money was just the warm-up. Next, he goes after her household, the people who make her life as queen possible. In coordinated night raids, he arrests 31 of her French servants, her physician, her confessor, her children's tutors, even her laundresses. These aren't random staff. They're her connection to her homeland, her childhood, her identity as a French princess. Hugh accuses them of spying for France, but there's no evidence, no trial, just his word. The Chronicle of London paints a heartbreaking picture. Isabella weeping openly in court, but nobody dares comfort her, terrified of Hugh's wrath. One noblewoman who offered her a handkerchief was fined 100 marks for encouraging sedition. That's how tight his grip was. Empathy was a crime if he didn't like it. Then comes the cruelest blow. Hugh takes Isabella's children. Her 8-year-old son, Prince John, is ripped from her household and handed to Hugh's wife, Eleanor de Clare. Her 6-year-old daughter, Princess Eleanor, is sent to Despenser properties in Wales. Isabella's allowed one supervised visit a month, with Hugh's spies watching her every word. This isn't just politics. It's breaking her as a mother, as a person. Medieval queens got their power from 3 things: land, household, and their role as mothers to royal heirs. Hugh attacks all 3, turning Isabella into a ghost in her own kingdom. One incident shows just how twisted this was. In 1325, Isabella's sent to negotiate peace with Scotland, a legit royal duty she's good at. But as she's traveling through dangerous territory, Hugh pulls her military escort, leaving her vulnerable to capture by the Scots. She barely escapes, thanks to local monks who hide her. When Hugh hears about it, he reportedly says, one less problem to manage if the Scots had done their job. The king's favorite casualty, wishing the queen would disappear, and nobody bats an eye because he's got Edward's blessing. Even public appearances become a stage for Hugh's cruelty. Christmas 1324, when the royal families, supposed to show you Isabella's letters, preserved in French archives, reveal her despair. I'm a prisoner without walls, a queen without authority, a mother without children, a wife without a husband's protection. That's a woman realizing her world's been stolen. What makes this chilling is how legal it was. Hugh didn't break laws, he weaponized them. Every seizure, every arrest, every humiliation had royal paperwork. Edward's signature was on everything, whether he understood it or not. Historians debate Edward's role. Was he in on it, or just so dependent on Hugh he went along? One chronicler put it bluntly, the king saw through Despenser's eyes and heard through Despenser's ears. That's not a king. That's a puppet, and Hugh was pulling the strings. Why didn't anyone stop this? Nobles were in a bind. Opposing Hugh meant treason, but supporting him meant enabling a system destroying their traditions. Most bided their time, hoping for change. But Hugh miscalculated. Wealth and dignity, Hugh didn't just make an enemy. He created his own executioner. And that brings us to a twist so wild it sounds like fiction. Before his attack on Isabella ramps up, and Hugh's in hot water. A coalition of barons, fed up with his corruption, forces Edward to exile him and his dad. Sip wine and wait out the storm. Not Hugh. He looks at exile and sees opportunity. not for redemption, but for chaos. He gets a ship, recruits disgraced knights and career criminals, and turns the English Channel into his playground. Imagine a fired White House chief of staff hijacking cargo ships off Virginia. That's the audacity we're talking about. The English Channel in 1321 is the medieval Amazon shipping route. Wool to Flanders, wine from Gascony, silver from Spain, luxury goods from the Mediterranean. Control a piece of it, and you're rich. Hugh, with his insider knowledge from years as chamberlain, knows which ships to hit, when they sail, and what they carry. This isn't random piracy, it's economic warfare. In 3 months, his fleet captures 16 merchant vessels worth £60,000, more than most nobles saw in a lifetime. The Chronicle of Lanercost captures the shock. Despenser, who once judged others for theft, became the greatest thief on the Narrow. Says, Hugh's organized. Most pirates didn't do paperwork, but he keeps records of every heist. 2,000 sacks of wool, 500 tons of Gascon wine, Flemish cloth worth 8,000 marks, Spanish silver for coins. Merchants tell wild stories. Robert Dretton, whose ship was taken near Dover, said Hugh showed up in court clothes under a mail coat, commanding pirates like he was running a council meeting. Another reported Hugh inspecting cargo manifests with the same obsession he gave royal documents. He didn't just rob ships, he attacked the Cinque Ports, England's naval backbone, burning warehouses of his enemies while sparing allies. This was revenge dressed as piracy. The fallout was huge. Hugh hit 2 Genoese ships, and Genoa threatened to ban English merchants from the Mediterranean. French diplomats raged about your favorite turned sea criminal. But Edward, his navy patrolled everywhere except where Hugh operated. Why? He was plotting to recall Hugh, and every pound stolen was a pound for their comeback. Hugh set up bases on the Channel Islands, a legal gray zone, built supply chains for stolen goods, and issued safe passage documents for ships that paid tribute. He recruited over 200 men, knights, sailors, thugs, creating a pirate navy. The Bishop of Exeter wrote, Despenser rules the waves more effectively as a pirate than he ever ruled as chamberlain. This pirate phase was short, but game-changing. When Edward recalls Hugh in 1322, he returns with a war chest, a criminal network, and zero fear. He'd learned direct theft was profitable, but legal theft was sustainable. Armed with the king's seal and no conscience, Hugh's about to take his greed to a new level, stealing not just ships, but entire counties. By 1322, Hugh's back as chamberlain, and his pirate days taught him how to scale up. He launches the biggest land grab in medieval English history, a scheme so massive it's called the Great Devouring. Between 1322 and 1326, he steals 41 castles, countless lordships, and whole regions, using forged documents, trumped-up charges, and intimidation. This isn't conquest with armies, it's theft with paperwork. Take Lady Barrett, a widow with 3 manors in Leicester. In 1324, Hugh wants her land, so he accuses her of plotting against the king. She's dragged to the tower for sharp questioning, torture by another name. After 3 weeks, she signs over her estates, worth £500 a year, and dies 6 months later, broken. The paperwork's perfect, legal, and sealed. Then there's the Gloucester inheritance. When the Earl of Gloucester dies without male heirs, his estate should split among his sisters, including Hugh's wife, Eleanor de Clare. Hugh wants it all, producing fake documents claiming the others owe crown debts. When one sister, Elizabeth de Clare, protests, Hugh jails her husband until she signs over £3,000 worth of property. In Wales, he grabs 41 castles and lordships, not by fighting but by accusing owners of treason, seizing their land temporarily, and never returning it. By 1326, his income jumps from £500 to £12,000 a year, and he controls more castles than any non-royal in history. He brags, "Wales is mine by right of superiority, for the weak must yield to the strong." Medieval property law was ripe for this. Charters could be forged. Courts were controlled by the king's men, and judges served at Edward's pleasure. With Hugh running the show, resistance was futile. Nobles who fought back faced imprisonment or torture. Many gave up to avoid Lady Barrett's fate. Hugh's success was his empire. Land meant soldiers, money, influence. He wasn't just rich, he was a king in all but name. But he made a fatal mistake. He started stealing from a church. By 1325, Hugh's eyeing ecclesiastical lands. The church in medieval England isn't just spiritual. It's a powerhouse with vast estates and the power to damn souls. Stealing from bishops and abbeys is like spitting in God's face. Hugh doesn't care. He targets a Gloucestershire abbey, claiming it hid taxes, and produces a fake charter saying its land was illegally granted. His men occupy it before the monks can appeal. He repeats this across England, grabbing church lands worth thousands. The Polychronicon calls it a blasphemy against gods. Anointed. Bishops preach about divine wrath, warning that Hugh's greed invites disaster in a world where bad harvests or lost battles are seen as God's punishment. Then there's the other storm. Rumors about Hugh and Edward II. Chroniclers whisper they're not just close, but too close, accusing them of sodomy, a term covering anything unnatural from homosexuality to heresy. In medieval England, sexual accusations are a weapon, like a nuclear bomb for reputations. Homosexuality could mean burning at the stake, and sodomy accusations made you a cosmic threat. Were they lovers? It's murky. Edward had a history with male favorites, like Piers Gaveston, killed in 1312 amid similar rumors. The Vita Edwardi Secundi compares Edward's bond with Piers to Jonathan's love for David. With Hugh, it's the same: private meetings, lavish gifts, 50 properties, jewels, titles. They sign over 200 documents together, which clerks found weird, like they were one person in two bodies. But kings gave gifts to favorites without sodomy accusations, and Hugh was married with kids, his wife in on his schemes. The rumors get loud only when his power peaks, suggesting they're political, not personal. Poems circulate with explicit details. Anonymous letters claim England's ruled by sodomy, and sermons hint at unnatural vice. It's a smear campaign, turning Hugh into a scapegoat for every problem. Bad harvests, lost battles, all blamed on his sin. This makes him a target for rebellion, as nobles can claim it's there. Duty to stop a king committing unnatural acts. These mistakes, stealing from the church, letting rumors fester, give Isabella her opening. By late 1325, she's in France, exiled by Hugh's schemes, but plotting with Roger Mortimer, a disgraced noble with his own grudges. They build an invasion force with French support and disaffected English allies. In September 1326, they land in England, and the kingdom's ready to explode. Nobles, merchants, even the church rally to Isabella, fed up with Hugh's tyranny. Towns surrender without a fight, and the Chronicle of Lanercost describes people cheering Isabella as England's savior. Hugh and Edward try to flee, but are captured in November 1326 in Hereford. Isabella doesn't just want Hugh dead, she wants him erased. On November 24th, Hereford hosts a 4-hour torture spectacle. Thousands gather, vendors sell snacks, and Isabella watches from a royal box, wine in hand, like it's a tournament. Hugh's dragged naked from his cell, shaved head to toe, painted with biblical insults, Judas on his forehead, sodomite down his spine, and crowned with stinging nettles. Tied backward to horses, he's paraded through streets where his. Burn his genitals before his eyes, then disembowel him slowly, burning his intestines while he's conscious. After 4 hours, they behead him 3 strikes, maybe on purpose. His head goes to London. Corruption, beheading silences evil counsel. The crowd's complicity, throwing refuse, voting on body parts, makes it communal justice. Isabella's not just settling a score. She's showing England whose. England to warn against abusing power. His head, tarred and caged, sits on London Bridge, seen by all entering the city. York gets his right arm, Bristol his left, Hereford and Northampton his legs. The judge who sentenced Hugh dies mysteriously in 1332, possibly poisoned. 6 of the 12 nobles who signed his death warrant die, suspiciously, within 5 years. The executioners found dead in 1328, his body mimicking Hugh's wounds. Merchants who profited face audits and fires. The Chronicle of Westminster Chants, Despenser's ghost demands company. This cycle shows medieval justice wasn't about fairness. It was power and precedent. Hugh's spectacle normalized extreme violence, making Mortimer's fate inevitable. Edward III breaks the cycle carefully, punishing enough to restore order, without new martyrs. The Polychronicon calls it divine justice, but it's revenge dressed in holy robes. Hugh's crimes were monstrous, displacing 300 families, stealing from nobles, merchants, the church. But did they justify 4 hours of torture and 4 years of display? It was justice by medieval logic, where traitors needed spectacular punishment, but it was also vengeance. His fall shows our urge to destroy those we hate, not just punish them. The crowd cheering, Isabella's wine, the body parts on tour. It's not so different from today's social media pile-ons or public. That in medieval England, what goes around comes around, hard. This saga has been a wild dive into corruption, betrayal, and punishment. From Hugh's rise to his gruesome end, from Isabella's revenge too. Shock you most? Hugh's piracy, his execution, or the cycle that took everyone down? Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for more WTF history. Stay curious and watch out for those medieval tightropes.